Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is AI Exposes Lazy Management, Why Work Redesign has to come before the technology. I'm joined by Jackson Lynch, founder and president of Talent Sherpa. Jackson, welcome.
It's such a joy to be with you this morning. So looking forward to our talk.
Yeah, I think this will be a really interesting conversation. It's certainly a topic that comes up a lot lately. So you have a really interesting background to get to kind of where we are. You sort of went through the industrial engineering phase from, Boeing 777 and then in HR, roles at International Paper, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, HR role at VP of HR role at Nestle, CHRO at Clearwater Paper, Sonoma Energy. So you've kind of been all over the map there in the HR side of it. And now you're running Talent Sherpa as a CHRO consigliere. I like that word. How did that? Can you give me a little bit about how do you get from engineering to enterprise AR? And now to advisory work, and how do you think about this intersection of AI and workforce strategy?
Yeah, so Boeing wasn't HR. It was all about process discipline and systems thinking, and what happens when handoffs break at scale, and that never really left me. Industrial engineering also taught me that output variability is almost always structural. So if you have a bad system, that's the problem. It's probably not a bad person, and yet in most of human capital, we invert those two. But W. Edwards Deming was right, and so the through line, I think, from Boeing all the way through to where we are today has been, I've always been more interested in the operating model than the actual org chart, and so I think Talent Sherpa is just the natural instinct to that. Working with CHROs who are trying to do what I was trying to do in the seat, get the business to address human capital as infrastructure, not overhead, and that background, whether it be the engineering or the finance background, and working in large companies and in gritty companies and private equity and public companies, I think it uniquely puts me in a position for the moment that we're certainly stepping into now.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I mean, in our conversation, preparing for this, you made a statement that it could be seen as fairly provocative, and that is, AI is exposing lazy management, right? And your argument was interesting. Organizations have gotten away from, for decades with vague job descriptions, activity-based metrics, unclear role definitions, because humans sort of throw themselves in the gap, right? Now that companies are trying to, hand work off to AI, though, the gaps are more visible. I mean, can you unpack that a little bit? And, what exactly breaks when you try to deploy agents against poorly defined work?
Well, when AI hits fog, it scales the fog, and that's the fundamental breakdown. Mm-hmm. Historically, we have taken new technologies and we've layered it on top of whatever foundational model happened to be in place at the time, and we, especially in human capital, where we don't always think in systems methodologies, we have over the years tried to change our processes. We have tried to change our technology to meet our existing processes without ever actually thinking, is that process built in a way that can be efficient, effective, and defensible all at the same time? Mm-hmm. So now we're kind of in this world where almost no one has an outcome-based job spec, and you want to then have to redesign how the work gets put together and figure out what is the right organization of the work. How do we think about the approach to splitting up? What does a human do, whether it's in or above the loop? What does an agentic workforce do? Where do I need contingent gig workers that I historically have always used full-time employees for? And the root cause on all of that, I think, Michael, is no one has ever really asked the hard questions about how the work gets designed. And yet in this moment, it's not just layering on top. It is complete redesign. And I think the breakdown, to be even more provocative, is it's immediate, it's visible. Lazy management was invisible for years because no one had to, because the people would just figure it out. It's the beauty of humanity. Mm. But everything that we have been able to avoid for years is going to show up on day one of agent redeployment, because I think it's like a mirror. The AI doesn't make the bad system worse. It just reflects how bad it already was, and it does it, faster and in front of more people. So, but you can't avoid the question of what is this role actually supposed to produce, and that's the thing we've been dodging for years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an interesting problem, right? Because we certainly, have workflows and we think we understand them, I guess. But, automating a broken process just makes it break faster, right? And at machine speed. So not even at human speed. So,
and at scale.
And at scale. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So certainly that's a part of the problem, I guess. And it is true. We've layered technology across the process without kind of re-engineering for a long time, because humans can fill the gaps, and honestly, even some systems sort of ignore the gap, right? Because they're not really based on the workflow. So focused on outcome is definitely different. I mean, how do you draw a clear line between activity-based role definitions and outcome-based role definitions, and the idea that the shift to outcomes is not optional anymore because agents are in the picture. I mean, what does an outcome-based role clarity, what does that really look like in practice? And why are so many organizations been able to avoid that for a very long time?
Because humans are creative and we just figure out and we fill stuff in. And that's the beauty of humanity. Unfortunately, as we kind of rethink high value added work versus low value added work and where that gets put into the system, you got to create the context and the clarity for the agentic workforce, no matter whether it's very, very tightly controlled, small decisions, repeatable, or if we're getting into something a little bit more complex. But let me step back and maybe answer the first part of your question. What's the difference? I'll use a finance example. In accounts receivable, if you were to look at 75, 85, I'm making the number up, a high percentage of the job specs out there, the accounts receivable clerk is going to be responsible for collecting cash. That's an activity. They can do that. Mm-hmm. There's no qualitative measure on there. And then you look at what an outcome for that role might be, would be to shrink the cash collection cycle. That's an outcome based. Now, what's the difference between the two? I can do the first without ever doing the second. In fact, I can do the first while doing the opposite of the second. And now I'm in a position where, how do I hold someone accountable? Because all I've said is do this task, and they're doing the task. They're just doing it poorly. And so I end up having a challenge with the employee over time. By the way, if I'm outcome based, now I can evaluate relative to the history and my confidence level in their ability to develop the outcome. It allows the creativity of the human being in trying to figure out what's the best and most efficient way to get to the outcome. And even as you're thinking about outcomes versus activities, you end up thinking about, how do I design for reliability, which is the way to be looking forward in time. And it allows you to make sure that you're thinking about, what is it that needs to be true for us to be able to do this reliably. If you're in an activity based, you end up hearing things like accountability, which is usually backwards looking and blame oriented. So, and then the question, why do we do it this way? I think it's human. It's chemical. Activities drive dopamine hits. We like activities. We don't like things that are a little bit more fuzzy, that are out into the future. And yet the moment that we're in, we've got to rewire the way we think about these things And there's nothing but upside when we do. We're just not good at it.
Yeah. It's interesting if we think about the definition of agentic AI, and part of that requirement is that the agents are goal-based. And I would argue that we're really not good at goal-based, that we're really not good at figuring out what the goals should be, right? I mean, I always sort of joked about if 100 cold calls is good, 1,000's better. So let's just change the quota to 1,000 instead of 100. And that may or may not get you what you want, and it's certainly going to lead to bad behavior. So it's an interesting paradox, right? That we're trying to move to something that needs those goals, and yet we are classically not particularly good at figuring out what that metric should be and how to measure it, right?
Yeah, because in your example there, like I could, if the goal is 1,000 cold calls, I can make 1,000 cold calls without one single sale.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why the activity, you can't do that.
Yeah.
What is the outcome of that role? The outcome of that role is to hit your sales quota.
Yeah. Yeah.
It shouldn't matter to me whether I do it with 3 people or 30 people. If I go after whales or if I'm going after a bunch of small dollar clients, like that's where, if we can figure out a way to get that part right,
Yep,
it will be an enabler for everything else we do. And candidly, AI and the agentic workforce requires that to be successful. And that allows us to redesign the work.
Yeah. Well, and it has to be really specific and correct, right? I mean, I was working with a client not long ago who had defined their customer service agents in a way that said, basically, just keep the customer happy. And guess what happened? The agent did keep the customer happy. Of course, the financial hit that they took because of all the refunds was a little painful. You have to be careful about the goal, right? I mean, because your outcomes may not be exactly what you were expecting.
Right.
One of the words that I've heard used a lot, and I think maybe even when we were doing our prep, we talked about it, is this idea of work disaggregation. The idea that before you layer AI onto the workflow, you have to actually break the work down itself and redesign it from the ground up, so that you get an optimized process, and that's different from kind of what the typical vendor pitch is of just plug the tool in and turn it on, and you get to automate whatever you're doing, and that'll be great. I mean, can you work us through kind of what this work disaggregation looks like, and have you seen organizations use it, and the ones that get it right versus the ones that don't get it so right?
So the very first question I think you need to ask is a subset of 3, I guess. What tasks, what are the tasks that, as we lead into, are all around whatever we're trying to do? And then you need to be able to not only talk about what the technology does, but also all of the wraparound processes. And candidly, it's the wraparound processes that trip us up. It's those processes that require Sally in payroll to be the breaker on the fuse box, because she knows what actually means, what this means, and what goes this direction versus that direction. You have to be able to document all that, and we do a bad job of that. The second thing that we struggle with is then how do we figure out what are high value tasks and low value tasks? And once you figure that out, you can then ask the questions: what tasks require human judgment? What requires human kind of relationship, and what tasks should be done agentically altogether? And today, most of those workflows they include all 3 at the same time. They're not separated. So the organizations, I think they get it right, ran that kind of disaggregation before they applied it into the tool. And that allows you to go into the vendor conversation with a whole separate set of criteria. It's not what will it do, it should be what will it deliver. And again, it comes back to that outcome piece that we were talking about earlier. Like, if you haven't defined that, you're not ready for a demo. So don't do it. And there are companies out there and that are helping people figure out what that broader workflow is. That's going to be critically important to be able to say, I want humans in or above the loop in the ones that require coordination or judgment. I want the agentic workforce to be focused in on those things that are repeatable with clear, firm rules. And the reality is we not only we're not good at that, but when it frees up our time, we've done a really poor job so far trying to figure out what do you do with the time that you just freed up, which is why you have so many people that are saying, yeah, we have freed up 8 hours a week and we're getting 1 hour of productivity because we haven't told people what to do with the other 7 hours. Right. Like I can do emails faster. So instead of doing fewer emails, or the same ones faster, I am now doing, 8x the emails, which is exactly not productive.
Yeah, exactly. But you do get more non-productivity. That's good.
Indeed. But like the question I would ask is if you have a company that's going through this, who is owning that work design? Mm-hmm. It's not a technology approach. Okay. It does have financial implications, but it's not a finance program. Right. It is a work design issue. Okay, people are involved, so maybe the CHRO ought to go do it. And that's what a lot of the kind of Fortune 50 companies are doing. But I spend most of my time in the SMB space. There aren't many who have been brought up in that kind of systems thinking work design. I think there's an entire job inside of organizations that has never been there, that needs to be there. Now, I would put it in human capital, candidly, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we don't, in most cases, have that skill set in-house today.
Yeah. I mean, there was a time when that was a really hot topic, work redesign, process reengineering in the 90s, particularly. We used to talk about it a lot, but I'm not sure we even really meant what we're talking about today, right? Because I can automate some of this. I can have a system tell me what the system process is, but I don't really talk about what the people are doing, right? So you've got to have all those pieces together, and that's not easy.
Well, but let me double click on what you just said, Michael, and that's the watch. That's the watch out. If you are automating tasks without doing the redesign work, you're going to get yourself in the exact same spot of I'm still doing a lot of work. So the question I would ask is, how much of the work, how many of the tasks today need to be there?
Yeah.
And I think that answer is a lot less than the ones that we're currently doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair because we haven't really spent the time to truly understand the work from both the system perspective and the human interacting in the system to make it work. Right. So that's, yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about this customer service misstep, keep the customer happy kind of an idea. I mean, there's a lot of risk there in having the wrong goals or not setting goals. And that's a lot different than managing a human employee.
Right.
I mean, how should leaders think about setting guardrails? And when we're talking guardrails, I think sometimes when people think about agents, they think, oh, they just go do stuff and you don't have to, like, it's probabilistic, right? They're going to go do the thing and they'll hand it the way they want and you gave them the right goal and whatever. But the truth is there are things you don't want them to ever do. So those are deterministic guardrails. And then there are softer guardrails that are more like alert me if these things start to stray in certain directions, right? I sort of think about it like an air traffic controller, keep it in this zone. But if it goes outside this zone, you got to move it back immediately because that's bad. You don't want it out here. And this is just kind of bad. So you want to direct it to how to manipulate that, So, I mean, is that the way you think about this? And how do people think about these guardrails or should they think about the guardrails?
Well, let's maybe get to the answer to that by starting with, today we have humans. So what does a human bring to the equation? I think they come with a built-in set of constraints, judgment, self-preservation, awareness of context. And generally speaking, if they see they're about ready to go off the cliff and they're capable enough to see that this is about ready to go off the cliff, they turn the car or they hit the brake. An agent, at least today, isn't there yet. they will follow the instruction. So if the instruction was wrong, you're going to get the machine speed and machine scale of whatever that wrongness is. So, your keep customers happy, that's a mandate. An agent is going to find the most direct path to do that. And millions of refunds, later, no one's questioning the mandate. They're questioning the agent. And the right question was never like, did the agent do the work? That was, of course. The question is, what was the mandate sound, and had we provided the guardrail? So I don't think it's a technology problem. I think it's a clarity problem, as most things are. And this is the part that scales differently, I think, than anything else that leaders have ever managed. A poor performer in a human role is going to damage a relationship or a very small part of that task. A misaligned agent can damage 1,000 relationships before anyone ever notices.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the speed and the scale that ends up being a real variable in there that raises the risk quite a bit. I just sort of had this weird flashback to the introduction of Apple Maps. And I'm thinking in my head, I saw the fact that, when it first happened, Apple Maps used to put the destination in all kinds of weird places, like it might be in the middle of a river or in the middle of a pond or whatever. And of course, navigation systems are deterministic. You go from point A to point B using the route that you've agreed to. And if point B is in the middle of a lake, it doesn't care, right? You're just going to point B. So, that's not where I want.
Well, I am probably the world's least handy husband. And even I have figured out that when I'm working on something, you've got to measure twice before you cut once. And that's a lesson I think we need to be in our work world applying, because we don't take the time up front to define that clarity. When you don't do that, you are opening up Pandora's box of where these agents can take things. And I think it's actually going to be a really important revolution for the way we think about work. And so I'm excited about it. I'm not one of the doomers. You want to tie things to purpose, talk about outcomes. And that is what the group that is coming into the workforce is always, is always asking for. And I'm a Generation X guy, which means I was raised on, hazing, hose water, and neglect. But even I wanted that. We just figured it out. We worked through it and created Vanilla Ice songs about how to handle problems. Right. Now I have it. So, but like that, we've got to rethink about how we do things, which means, and this is the hard discipline. We need to step back and say, what are we actually solving for here?
Yeah. I mean, you've spent decades working, with this C-suite and advising C-suite leaders, and the relationship between the CEO and the CHRO, it seems like now is even more critical perhaps than it was before to navigate this transition. But what's that conversation like? Because honestly, I think in a lot of companies, they think of AI and agentic AI particularly as a technology strategy, not a workforce strategy. So they don't really include the CHRO in that discussion, at least not early. I mean, what do you think the cost of leaving that out is, and what's the risk?
Well, I'm going to push back on your assumption there, because I think it is mostly true, but there's a bifurcation right now. And that bifurcation is, I think, around company size. You see a lot of the larger organizations that are very quickly pulling in the CHRO into the AI enablement, and you're now coming up with a title. I'm a chief people officer and chief people and enablement officer, or whatever the title is. You're seeing that across a lot of the really big companies. When you get into the gritty SMB companies, they're still approaching it as a technology platform. And I think they're going to find that is going to not give them the return that they have in their head. And it will break what we've just been talking about, because you will automate tasks, and that's not going to change and redesign the work. There is a challenge in the CHRO ranks and the SMB space of design thinking, and most don't have anyone dedicated to that on their team. I do a lot of CHRO advisory work, and I have 3 jobs that I say, like, go figure out a way to invest in it today to be ready for this. And one of them is a systems engineer. And like that opens up a whole different way of thinking about it. The other thing I think is, what separates those two isn't really capability. It's the CEO's mental model of what the CHRO is for. And like, if you were to grab 5 CEOs and 5 CFOs, you're going to find very little variability between what good looks like, what expectations are, and kind of what the pillars are of experience that they need to bring to the table to be successful. You do that same exercise between CEOs and CHROs. First off, you're going to have 5 different titles for the HR person. And then you're going to have wide degree of variability, largely a result of where that CEO was historically and what that expectation has been. And I think that is going to drive an SMB catch-up reality. And smaller organizations are just deploying AI, but they're still doing it as fast, but they're doing it without the talent architecture, I think, to support it. So what I would tell the CEOs in that space is, it's not a question of whether your HR leader can handle it. The question is whether you've given them the mandate that reaches that far. And in most cases, they haven't. So that's going to default to technology. The technology is going to then scale current processes without the work design that all of this will ultimately enable.
I mean, it strikes me, and I've been talking about for a year or more, probably, the idea of a digital workforce, and when you employ that, it's a hybrid workforce of humans and digital workers. And in my mind, I mean, I probably am really talking about full-time employees and AI agents, but the truth is it's a little more nuanced than that. I mean, you've got contractors, fractional talent. I mean, how do you think of that hybrid workforce, and how do you see that shift, kind of playing out over the next few years?
Well, I think there's looking backwards, the default model was, if I need a job, I'm going to hire a full-time employee to do that. And I'll have some technology tools that let them do that work faster. But as we're sitting here, to your point, I think all of that's being stress tested in real time. The new math is, some work requires a dedicated human. Some work is better done by an agent. Some work is episodic enough that you want that fractional talent. And you need to figure out, and this is why I think ultimately this workforce optimization sits in the what's currently called the HR space, the human capital space, because it's a labor model that you need to apply it. But let me, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the concept of pivotal roles. Let me maybe go on a sidecar for here a second. A pivotal role would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 7% of your roles that have an outsized influence on your organizational performance. And there's all sorts of psychology underneath there that kind of backs all that up. But the notion is, I need to know what those 5 to 7% of those jobs are. And then I need to figure out how I can apply my all of my talent methodologies to ensure that we have the best players in that role as you move forward. So what does that mean? That means understanding which roles are important and filling them with humans that are in the top 25% of what I can get in the market for those roles becomes increasingly important, not less so. I think it's always been super, super important. And you've seen companies that take that talent density and talent portfolio optimization approach have done that well. And their companies have outperformed over the years. And so I think the CHROs who own this transition might turn into chief workforce optimization officers. No one likes that title that I've talked to, but I think ultimately that's the work. Call it whatever you want. It's not HR, not in the much more traditional way of thinking about it. And it's really owning that redesign from headcount to capability and What capabilities do we need? Who provides them? What's the labor model we apply? And ultimately, I think that's the new planning frame.
Mhm. I mean, so you have a background in industrial engineering, and we talked a little bit about, and you've mentioned several times system thinking when we're talking about, the new hybrid workforce. But let's be a little more specific, though. I mean, how does this engineering lens really influence the way you advise advise organizations about their AI adoption plans compared to maybe how you would have normally, typical HR change management kind of a discussion in the past?
So historically, even if you follow the great change methodologies, whether it's Cotter's model or Connors or whoever,
Mhm.
you are going from the assumption that is I am trying to move the organization to the right place. That's the change lens. An engineering lens is, have we designed the organization right first? And we usually skip that process. Okay. We have
Mhm.
redesigned the factory floor. Okay. What did we do in order to drive the efficiency in where we have our machines and the footprint and the throughput? Well, we've engineered everything. Think
Mhm.
about that same model and now apply it to the way we're doing work. The question I keep asking that surprises a lot of human capital people is, where's the handoff in this workflow and who owns it?
Mhm.
And then I ask the same question of the technology people, and I ask the same question of the finance people and the operators, and no one knows. And ultimately, those undefined handoffs are where value leaks, and that's a industrial engineering
Mhm.
concept. And I think it applies very, very well
Yeah.
to human capital systems. So today, most AI enablements are treating work design as a change management problem. How do we get people to adopt the new tool? How do we get them to automate what we're doing? The engineering framing, I think, flips it and asks the question: what does the work system need to look like for the tool to produce the output that we want?
Yeah.
And that output variability is almost always structure.
Yeah. I mean, that is a different focus if you really start to think about the outcomes and making sure the outcome is what you want and how do you get to that outcome. That's a different mindset than perhaps we've used in the past when we think about work redesign.
Well, I don't think we ever really think about, not
Yeah.
pushing back. I don't think we ever really asked those questions. What are we solving for?
Mm.
Someone has come up with a tool. Someone has done the math. If we implement this tool, it will save us a certain amount of money. It'll drive a certain amount of efficiency. And then we have historically plugged it in. And if IT is running an AI implementation, that's what we'll see before, or what we'll see again as we move forward, because that's what we've always done. And that's why this moment, I think, is so
Mm.
uniquely precious. We got to think about it differently.
Yeah. I mean, I hear a lot of talk about human in the loop, and I've argued for a bit that human in the loop is a transitionary stage for most processes. I mean, there are certainly some high risk things that I don't ever want an agent to do by themselves, or at least for the foreseeable future. But in general, there's kind of this continuum of human in the loop, human on the loop, and what I called human in the lead. So there's processes where I want to get so that I'm really setting the goals and I'm reviewing performance, but I don't really have an active role because I sort of think about it like I've got a poor human sitting there reviewing everything an agent wants to do. It's fine if it's one agent. I mean that's still going to be a lot, but okay. But what if it's 100 agents? Am I going to review 100 activities every second? Like, how do there's no way to scale that, right? It just doesn't make sense at some level that I've got a human pushing the button every time. Not only that, it'd be a miserable job. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think human in the lead is a place that we can get to and should get to in some case?
So every agent you have needs a outcome oriented job description
Mhm.
that defines where your handoffs are, defines what the outcomes are, and defines your solution boundaries that you
Mhm.
cannot go across. I think the ultimate solution to what you just talked about is going to be a two-step. One is you're going to have agents that are going to be doing the QC for all the other
Yeah.
agents. And then I think there's an orchestration level that we don't talk about as much. And that is where I think it's probably more a human above the loop, not a human in the loop. And if you think about, what is the most important thing that we could be doing today? It is all about creating those outcomes, the solutions boundaries, identifying the handoffs, and that will ultimately allow us to figure out where we have judgment, where we have relationships, where we have, and I mean that in the most productive way possible.
Right.
Customer relationships and the like. I think if Michael, if we think about that orchestration level differently than what we are today, I think that is an unlock that we're not really getting to. For me, as I talk to my folks in my ecosystem, every time someone talks about human in the loop, it started to trigger for me that they haven't actually rethought the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it as fear too, right? It's, oh no, it might make a mistake. So I'm just going to have somebody sit there all the time and approve it before the decision's made. So there won't be a mistake, right? Unfortunately, at scale, it's not really reasonable to think you could do that with every process, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Not only is it not practical, but like, who would want to do that?
Well, yeah, no, I don't want that. Thanks. No, it does sound awful. Can I just train an agent to do that?
That's ultimately what's going to look. The agentic workforce is really good with clear boundaries, specific outcomes, and specific context that's been applied. That's where human judgment is going to become important. But AI, even in that space, is still going to be a thought partner that you can use.
Yeah. So I know that you co-host a podcast, Talent Sherpa, with Scott Morris. So that means you're in regular conversations with HR leaders, business executives about this topic. From those conversations, I mean, what are the biggest misconceptions that you hear from senior leaders about what AI will and will not change about their workforce?
Yeah, I think there are a handful that jump up. One is that AI is an IT project. We've talked about it. It's not. It's a work to redesign product or project, and today no one really owns that work. And I think human capital or whatever kind of workforce optimization future we have, that's where that work comes in. I think the second thing I hear a lot about is we'll figure out the work design after we see how people use it. So there's like this really focus on adoption. And I think to your most recent point, that has a lot to do with fear, and that's a very expensive version of what we're trying to do, because work design decisions made in the improvisation period set, they're going to calcify, and they're not going to drive the redesign work that we need to do. I was talking with a CEO recently, and I said, "How are you defining success?" And I was told, right now it's about adoption. And like, again, I don't want to rehash things we've talked about for the last half hour, but again, wrong. That's a technology implementation view, not a work redesign view. And then I hear a lot from both CHROs and CEOs talking about, well, the CHRO's role is to own the people side, as if it is downstream from the portfolio optimization discussions that need to have. Right. And I think when you do that, you will find two things. One, you will automate tasks. You won't redesign the work. As a result of that, you're less likely to deliver the outcomes that you want from an efficiency gain. You will be less precise in how you reapply whatever efficiencies you've found. And as a result, I think Parkinson's law is that the work is going to expand to the time you had it, and you have someone that saved an hour in emails, and so they're going to do twice as many emails, right? And so I think those things are all very much in play. And the data point I keep coming back to, Michael, is that I think 60% of 75% of executives right now are admitting that their AI strategy is more for show, and the ROI that's coming out of those implementations is really, really low. I think it was an MIT study. It's a couple months old now, but it was like 95% of everything that people have done in the corporate world for AI enablement has not delivered an ROI.
Mm.
When I heard that number, I thought, wow, 5%? That feels high. Because we're just automating stuff. This is no different. We've got to rethink the entire mix.
Yeah. I mean, for the CHRO or the CEO who's listening right now and knows they're getting ready to implement, to roll out a hybrid workforce system, but they haven't really taken any steps yet. I mean, they're just planning, right? They're thinking about this. Where should they begin? And what's the first piece of work they should do before they even start evaluating AI tools?
Yeah, first, I would not touch a tool. I wouldn't sit down for a demo. I wouldn't do much of anything until I was very, very clear on what my most important roles are intended to produce.
Mm.
And I might then apply work redesign concepts to best position those pivotal roles. Again, we defined that earlier as these are the roles where being great versus good will have an outsized impact on business performance. Start there. Don't start at the bottom. That might be a cost out that might actually play there. But that also is your lowest leverage in your entire business. Start at the top with the jobs that have an outsized influence, and then figure out how do I make those people more productive. And if you can't answer like what those jobs are supposed to produce, and then you're not going to know how they're performing against that, and you don't have a workaround plan or a work design plan. You have a activity plan, and that's not going to get better with AI. It's just going to get faster and potentially more expensive. Look, I think the first piece of work, if I were to suggest to folks beyond that, is go into a team. Don't go into the entire organization. We go into a team. Finance is ripe for this. I think HR is ripe for this. And disaggregate the work. Go in and rethink, and you can use agile. You can use a lot of technology, methodologies that can help us do these things faster. Give them the authority to figure out what roles really need to be there versus what won't. Experiment, do it fast, move forward, break some things, and what I recommend for the folks I'm working with, like, go figure out how to onboard people faster. Like, there's low risk of screwing that up because it's so bad in most companies today anyway. Yeah. Everybody does it. No matter what happens in the future, it's not going to be throwaway work because we're always going to be bringing on employees, over the next 50 years, I'd suspect, at least. And Elon would disagree. We'll all be kind of eating bonbons and having babies, but on universal income. But find a place to experiment and do the redesign work and start building those chops and be really honest about what didn't work and incorporate premortems and red team. And when you do all of that stuff, like, you'll learn, and you'll learn fast, and you'll learn moving forward. And then the rest of it becomes really straightforward.
Yeah, that makes sense. A really interesting conversation. And as we kind of wind this up, one of the things I like to get at the end of the show, and I ask everybody, is it, could you recommend somebody that you think the audience would find interesting, a thought leader, an author, podcaster, somebody that they should follow and learn from? And it doesn't necessarily have to be an AI. I mean, obviously that's our topic, but it could be anything that you think would help them.
Yeah, I think the person I'd recommend is a guy named Tony Sarson. And Tony is a multi-time CEO. I worked for him for years in the PepsiCo organization and then with Nestle. And he has this methodology that he talks about being people first. He also is a scientist. I think he's a chemical engineer by training. And so he has the work redesign kind of thinking that is probably where the CEO skill set will be headed. Historically, that skill set has been first in sales, and then over the last 30 years in finance. I think it's this work redesign and engineering methodology as it relates to how do I build an organization towards outcomes that'll be important. Mm-hmm. And I can think of no one more worthy of a discussion on this topic than Tony.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. That great recommendation, and certainly audience, check that out. Well, Jackson, thanks so much for joining today. Really interesting conversation. I think that we're going to get a lot of good comments about this, or a lot of comments. Maybe they won't be good. I don't know. But anyway, we want to start a conversation, so that's always good. So thanks very much for joining.
Great to be with you. I appreciate it. And again, if anyone wants to follow my work, it can be found at mytalentsherpa.com.
Great. Thank you. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.